Mid-side is a powerful music production technique, but there is a distinct difference between mid-side recording and mid-side processing. Let us explain. Mid-side was originally developed as a recording technique by Alan Blumlein. To implement this technique, you would have a mono microphone that's pointed directly at the source, with a figure-of-8 microphone underneath it, with its null side pointing at the source. What this technique essentially allows us to do is to dial in the perfect balance between the direct source that's coming from the mono microphone, or the mid, and the stereo ambient image that's coming from the figure-of-8 microphone, or the sides. Now, in order to convert the signal coming from figure-of-8 microphone into stereo, we would have to decode it. So in this example, I have a mid-side microphone setup that is capturing the sound coming from an acoustic guitar. So on the way into my door, I have used the copy channels on the patch bay, and I have sent the signal that's coming from the figure-of-8 microphone into those copy channels, and then sending them to two different channels on the desk. Then I'm inverting the phase of one of those signals and panning them left and right. Another way to decode the signal coming from your sides microphone is by using the decoder plugin in your DAW. Now I can dial in the perfect balance between the direct signal coming from my sound source and the sides or the stereo ambient signal. You will notice by looking at the waveforms of my side signal that they're effectively out of phase with each other. This is what makes this recording technique so great for mono compatibility, because if I listen to my recording in mono, what will happen is that the waveforms from the side channels will essentially cancel each other out, while still leaving me with a direct signal coming from the mono or the mid microphone. Take note though that as I am increasing the levels in my side channel, the signal will eventually start to pan either to left or right, which can be exciting but can also become quite jarring. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're working with mid-sides as a recording technique. So that's how we can use mid-side as a recording technique. But what about mid-side in post-production? Does it split the signal between mono and stereo channels? Well, not exactly. Before we dive in, we'll be using iZotope Ozone 10, so hit the link in the description box below so you can download the free trial and follow along. Now that you have downloaded it, or if you've used iZotope Ozone 10, you will have noticed that many of the modules support mid-side processing. The way that it will work here is quite different from mid-side recording, and it's important that we know the difference between the two. Here, the hard-panned elements will be split 50-50 between mid and side channels, and it's only the sounds that are dead center of the stereo spectrum that will drop out of the sides channels completely. Mid-side processing in the context of mixing music involves manipulating the middle, or the mid, and side or stereo components of a stereo signal separately. Mid component represents the sounds that are common to the left and right channels, while the side component contains the differences between the left and right channels. By using mid-side processing, you can control the center and width of your stereo image. For example, I can apply different EQ and compression settings to the mid and side channels, and this will allow me to hone in on different elements in the stereo field. Of course, as we do apply mid-side processing, it can affect the phase relationship in the stereo field due to the sounds being split 50-50. So always check your mixes in mono to ensure that the changes you're applying translate well both in stereo and mono. This is where mid-side recording and mid-side processing are so different. Your mid-side recordings will inherently be mono compatible, whereas with mid-side processing, challenges can arise with the phase relationship in the stereo spectrum. Keep this in mind as we explore mid-side EQ, compression, and other exciting techniques in the rest of this video. Technique number 1 is using mid-side processing with Imager. In Ozone 10's Imager, you can split the stereo spectrum into 4 frequency bands and then individually control their stereo spread. For example, you could bring out some of the high frequencies and make them appear wider in the choruses for a bit of added impact. This can be achieved by simply automating the width of your different frequency bands. You can also reduce the stereo width of certain frequency bands, and you can use the recover sides slider to adjust the gain of the recovered sides signal. In this example, I am widening the high mids of my mix and reducing the width of the low end of my mix to create added impact. This is a very simple yet effective production technique that you can incorporate in your mixes to start applying some mid-side processing. Technique number 2 is using mid-side EQ. Both the EQ and dynamic EQ modules in Ozone 10 support mid-side processing. EQ can be a powerful way to process and emphasize certain frequencies and apply them to mid-side processing. As a general rule to keep in mind in mid-side EQ, boosting the mids and cutting the sides will narrow that frequency area, whereas cutting the mids and boosting the sides will widen that frequency area. Here in this mix example, I have a string arrangement that I would like to add some width and brightness to, and I really want to make it a more prominent part of the mix. I can simply hone in on those frequencies in the side channels and add quite a lot of boost with my sides EQ. I'm also cutting some frequencies in the mid channel, and this will make my string arrangement appear wider and brighter.
And I don't want to fall in love again. Please can I just keep my heart instead and tell me something like what to say or do. I can't keep doing what I think is right for you. And I don't want to fall in love again. Please can I just keep my heart instead and tell me something like what to say or do. I can't keep doing what I think is right for you.
To further emphasize this, I am pulling up the exciter module to add some extra harmonics to those frequencies and a little bit of extra excitement. And the exciter module can also be used for mid-side processing. Of course, when applying mid-side processing to a whole track or groups of instruments, it can be tough to hone in on just one element, so keep in mind that you will probably be affecting other instruments and vocals that might be sitting in that frequency range. So remember at the beginning of this video when we talked about mono compatibility of mid-side processing. This is a great example of that. Although the strings do sound wider and brighter compared to previously, when I switch my mix over to mono, they seem to pretty much disappear.
And I don't want to fall in love again. Please can I just keep my heart instead and tell me something like what to say or do. I can't keep doing what I think is right for you.
there's a lot of phase cancellation happening. So if you have access to the original mix, it would be better to go back to the original track and dial in the right balance between the string arrangement and the rest of the elements, rather than relying simply on mid-side after the mix has already been done. Mid-side EQ can be a fantastic technique for a lot of scenarios, but it's not always that wider and brighter means better, and as you can hear in this example, it's not really the ideal solution. Just like any production technique, discernment is your best friend. Mid-side EQ and any mid-side processing can be very exciting and fun to play around with, and it can also be very effective in so many mixing scenarios. But overusing it can lead to a lack of focus and lack of clarity in your mix, and phase cancellation issues as well. So with that in mind, let's look at another effective mid-side processing technique. Technique number 3 is mid-side compression. When using mid-side compression, compressing the mid-channel means that loud sounds closer to the center of the stereo image will make the overall stereo image wider. On the other hand, when compressing the side channel, it means that loud sounds further away from the center of the stereo image will make the overall stereo image more narrow. Multiband compression is where mid-side compression truly gets to shine. Not only can you split the compressor into different frequency bands, but you can also be very specific about applying different processing to mid and side channels, and it can be a very surgical way to use a compressor in mid-side processing. This technique can be especially effective in a mastering scenario where you don't have access to the original stems and multitracks, and you need to be very specific about how you're applying compression to certain frequency bands. For example, in this track, I'm just not very happy with the balance of the drums. So I am selecting 2 frequency bands where I'm focusing on the kick and snare. Of course, other elements will get picked up, but I'm trying to dial this in as much as I can. Because I know my kick and snare will be center of the track, I am adding some brightness and punch by compressing the mid channel. On this occasion, there is nothing I really want to do in the side channel, so just take a listen to the difference that this simple compression move has made to the overall balance of the track, just by honing in on those 2 elements, the kick and snare. Consequently, compressing the mid-channel has actually added some width to the overall mix. Mid-side compression can add another dimension to your typical multiband compressor and open up more possibilities in audio post-production. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it has inspired you to try mid-side recording, as well as applying mid-side processing to add stereo-based width manipulation to your mixes. There are so many possibilities with both creative and surgical ways to manipulate and process your sounds with mid-side processing. Just remember to be mindful of what else you are compressing, cutting, or boosting within a certain frequency range of your track, and how those changes affect the overall balance, phase, and polarity. Keep checking your mixes in mono and ensure you have good stereo monitoring either through headphones or well-placed speakers so that you can accurately hear how mid-side processing is affecting your tracks. Don't forget to share some of your favorite mid-side processing techniques with us in the comments below, and subscribe to iZotope YouTube for more mixing and production tips and tricks.